Maurice, thank you very much. My name's Christopher Boyce, founder of Katabolt, and to my left on my screen is Andy Mitchell, our growth strategist. Hopefully you can pick him. He's the one laughing right now. Team,
I'm on your right.
All right, good. Look, welcome to everyone to attending today. Katabolt have a big belief that if we can articulate our value in export markets, we can make this country a lot wealthier country and fix a lot of the challenges we exist in New Zealand. Today, we're going to have a great conversation around triaging your export markets and how can you get revenue or more revenue out of export markets faster in today's current climate of COVID-19. How we're going to do that today is we're going to have a very quick conversation, or we're going to present a few slides. It's not going to be a talks fest. It's just going to be a couple of slides around what we're seeing in the global market at the moment. Then we're going to have a very collaborative conversation, hence the reason we've set up the panel today with everyone being very open, because then we can have some good Q&A and answers and questions and get into a deeper dive around business and challenges that we're seeing in the market. Out of that today, some of the outcomes we're going to get to today is debate and a series of questions for exporters that they should be taking back into their business and asking the exporter manager, their marketing manager, their supply chain manager, are they triaging these markets? Because we believe that on a short-term horizon, there may be some risk in revenue undergoing with COVID-19. Also part of that, as we wrap up in the outcomes, I'm going to talk about funding options because there's a lot of capital and cash available at the moment for funding in the export space, especially from our friends at NCTE. And then we're all going to send out some questions for you and a two-pager. Andy, I'm going to pass across to you now to jump into a few slides there, and then we can open up into the questions in a short while.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen. 1 second. All right, is that good with everybody? This seems like the perfect place to say good morning and hello. I'm Andy Mitchell. I'm involved with the wonderful team at Katabolt. I'm the person that Chris has promised is not going to speak too long this morning. We are a really interesting business. And a very interesting time in terms of commerce in New Zealand at the present moment. As Chris said, we are New Zealand's leading private sector export consultancy, which means fundamentally we're here to get companies better prepared and into market faster, so that we can create greater wealth through your companies, for yourselves, for your shareholders, for your communities, and of course for your country as well. As a private sector company, we actually form a key cornerstone of the export industry, alongside our public sector partners who we work with pretty much hand in glove. New Zealand Trade Enterprise, as Chris has said, but also the Treasury with the Export Credit Office, and at a more dispersed level with the regional business partner network as well. So pretty much like yourselves, about 12 weeks ago, when we saw the crisis heading towards our shores, and we braced ourselves for a crunch, we braced ourselves for impacts. And I don't think there's a single business that we could possibly have on this call today that hasn't been through an awful lot of soul searching since then. And when the impact actually hit us, like it did with everything else, our world effectively stopped for a couple of days as everybody sort of dusted themselves down and worked out where to go. And as an organization that is used to being used to provide the strategic foundation of investment into export markets, we asked ourselves what our role could be. How could we best help in this situation when all planning had effectively stopped and business as usual had been taken straight off the boardroom table? So what we did, we looked deep inside ourselves, actually over a couple of beers in the Paddington, and went, maybe the best thing we can do for our export community right now is to leverage the thing that we have in spades, which is our network, to try to bring together people from across the planet and from across the sector, to try to share what's happening to them inside real time. The idea here is that none of us None of us know what's going to happen next. None of us have the answers. I mean, collectively, we have the people, the capability, the tools, but we don't have the answers. Nobody's been through this before. So what we did was set up an experiment that was, well, in about 2 days, to try to bring experts together to share and to collaborate and to tell us what is happening inside their businesses or inside their sectors in real time, so that the expert community can learn from each other and can start to piece together those critical bits of information that we need to be able to create a coherent plan. So here we are, 11 weeks of bringing together webinars with experts from across the world, 11 weeks, 11 topics, and 56 experts from across the public and private sector. We've spoken to a huge amount of people live on air to try to work out what's been happening. And what's been personally most pleasing for us involved in this is that the spirits that everyone's come to this challenge with, of sector collaboration, of open source learning, of sharing what's happening, the good and the bad, is actually now the norm inside our export community. This idea of sector collaboration, of free form, together we can do it better together, is now business as usual. So what we wanted to bring to you today was just a couple of little thoughts of what we've witnessed from all those 56 specialists that we've had on our webinar over the last 11 or 12 weeks. And the one coherent theme that we keep returning to that started started right in week 1 of this crisis is the lack of haste in businesses' response. What we've witnessed is businesses taking their time to act, which in the first few weeks was fine. We actually, we thought that was quite prudent. You're trying to find your bearings. You don't know which way's up, which way's down. So acting in haste, repenting in leisure, sometimes the old analogies are really useful. But as we've rolled through this, through lockdown from level 4 to level 3, to level 2 to level 1, what we've witnessed in terms of companies not taking action fast enough is actually now resonating and being reflected back to us by the experiences from our colleagues inside NZTE. We're witnessing the export sector not getting back on its feet fast enough. And of course, it's like Chris and I and the team at Katabolt are deep in the business of helping organizations to be able to move with more certainty, to de-risk investment decisions for exports, and to be able to go in a straight line in a much faster way. So we're really interested in what the blockages are from a leadership point of view that can be explained for businesses not getting out of the blocks here and not looking to their export markets with as much certainty or surety as they had before. And after much reflection in the past 2 to 3 weeks, we can kind of break this down into 4 individual behaviors, which we hope you'll find useful to reflect on. The first is no continuity. The second is no visibility. The third is no certainty. And the fourth is no precedence. And internally inside Katabolt, we've called them panic points, because when we've been using these and reflecting them back to the businesses that we're working with, what we've done is that we've been able to identify the executive behaviors, the psychological behaviors, the human behaviors that we think are actually stopping businesses from taking action to secure the future of some of their export markets. So let me unpack this a little bit for you. No continuity. The business issue that's connected to no continuity is the fact that your cash flow has been completely disrupted. Somebody, unbeknown, a single entity has blocked up the cash flow. The cash is not coming through. There is no longer the liquidity that was there before. On visibility, the business issue here that's led to that is the fact that nobody inside the organization can actually give you an accurate damage report. Things keep changing in real time. So as soon as you think you're on top of a situation, something else has either mended or something else has changed. There's no easy report that comes up to an executive or up to a board to say, this is where the damage is, this is what we should do. And when we reach out to a market level and we say, well, what's behind no certainty? Well, it's the fact that nothing is the same anymore. Everything that we used, those points of known, those points of certainty that we used to build very clear strategic frameworks are thrown up and down. It's not just that the world has changed, it's the fact that what we relied on is no longer there. And finally, when we turn to ourselves about decision-making, we go, there's no precedence. Well, because nobody's been through this before, my past as a leader actually can't guide the future. And nobody's can. There's nobody sitting around your executive table that tells you how you should possibly respond. So this is really interesting. So what we're seeing here is a huge rise in risk aversion inside the businesses that we're speaking to. markets, the fact that we don't want to do anything that's going to make our situation worse, but also that's limiting me from doing things that make my situation better, complete risk aversion. Secondly, from decision making, we're overemphasizing the importance of the little we know. In a time of no visibility, when you can't have a damage report, you don't know more than you know. And yet what we're doing here is that we're taking the little things, the little glimpses that we have, and we're making decisions based upon this small amount of things that we know for sure, not the big number of things that we need to grasp to be able to understand what's going on. The third point around certainty is what we're seeing here is that organizations are returning to pre-COVID as their benchmarks to return to. There's the sense that actually, this is like the only benchmark we have is how we were performing this time last year, or this how we were performing at the end of the fourth quarter or the end of February, that pre-COVID benchmark. And finally, that lack of precedent means that we're defaulting to the optimistic position where this is temporary. This is going to go. You know, I don't know what's going to happen, so therefore we're going to get through this. I just want to grasp onto something that's optimistic here. So this aversion to risk, this emphasis on using not a complete suite of facts to make decisions, this idea that pre-COVID is the benchmark that we're measuring our success and our progress by, and finally that we're looking optimistically and expecting things to be temporary, is actually, we think, giving us a false set of inputs into our strategic planning, and is helping organizations to be much slower and much less certain when it comes to changing their strategy when going into new markets. But most critically, what this means is that as an export community, we stop doing the thing that makes us so successful in the first place. New Zealand's export community is here for the new opportunity. We're all about value adds. We're about finding those niches or those hyper niches, those new markets, those places that are emerging where we can leverage what is all great about the way that we do business inside New Zealand. As a community, we've stopped looking for new opportunity, and we've become obsessed with this concept of the new normal, as if it's something which is actually real and is going to happen. And from our point of view, there is no new normal, there is only the new. And if we don't think about this this crisis of exporting about a transition to something which is new, not to normal, we'll lose that hunt for the little opportunity that's going to become the big opportunity that will become the basis of your export success in the future. So Chris and I were discussing over a couple of virtual beers last week, actually, what's the most useful thing from this that we could possibly do to help give you something to take back into your businesses, into your organizations this week. And what we decided to do was to try to break down the 5 or 7 questions that we think will be very useful for you to take back into your organizations, to ask, to provoke and to prompt responses around you, so that you can take a gauge on whether you too are being held back from taking action in the short term. So the first critical question here is asking whether your value chain has been triaged yet. Do you actually have certainty over which part of your value chain has been broken? And inside this, the conversations we've been having on our webinars for the last 7 weeks have come back time and time again to major disruptions, old disruptions and new disruptions to the supply chain into this country and out of this country as well. And this has become such a problem understanding this, that together with NZTE, Katabolt and NZTE have actually built a specific service product to help that triage happen in real time. Because the issue that we have when trying to triage, to try to get enough detail to understand which bit of your value chain or your supply chain has been broken, getting information out of markets and within a reasonable time frame has become almost impossible in some circumstances. So we've built a semi-automatic product to be used by NZTE customer managers and used by ourselves and used by people like you to be able to, within a week or within 10 days, to be able to accurately pinpoint the bits inside your supply chain or inside your value chain that are going to recover, so you can make a decision whether to persevere in a market or whether to move somewhere else. The second key question here, which we'd like you to take back into your business, is to ask whether you're willing to reset your performance benchmarks, a complete reset. And we say this because resetting those benchmarks to escape us from comparison to what was before is critical in being able to size the amount of work and the amount of effort it's going to take to get back a comparable market share in a market to what you had before. And I've become quite obsessed with tracking those different benchmarks, because I've been watching for any data points out there which give us an idea of how everyone else is resetting and how we should reset as well. And just from like, I don't know if anybody caught this, but the Minister for Trade and Export Growth, Monday, Tuesday this week, was speaking on their trade recovery strategy here, and quoted live the WTO trade forecasts and the prediction that world merchandise trade will reduce between 13 and 32% in 2020. So the WTO is changing their benchmarks. Our government is changing the benchmarks, NTTE is changing the benchmarks, and yet we're not seeing enough of our organizations that we're working with actively changing and making their benchmarks more fluid. Why this is really, really important is that benchmarking helps you compare yourself to how far you think you should be. And what I'd love to point out here is that the more that we track the way that our government is approaching the trade recovery here as well, the more we should take that nuance on board here. Again, from David Parker from a couple of days ago here, he's making the point really, really clearly that actually our ability to recover from this is only partly due to the action that we take. It's actually partly to do with how our international partners effectively respond to it as well. We're all in this together. So therefore, if we expect a quick return to our previous benchmarks, we're not really thinking about the fact that this has impacted everybody everywhere. This is not our problem, it's everybody's problem. The third point here I'd love you to take back to your business and to ask why don't our products have to change? And the articulation of that question is absolutely deliberate, because in a situation where we're not going towards a new normal, but we're heading towards a new, everything has to change. There is not one aspect of our business or our perspective or our product that shouldn't be scrutinized in the short term to make sure that it's still fundamentally fit for purpose. Because ultimately what COVID has done is that it's given us a very nasty supply and demand side shock. So the changes that you have to comprehend could be about inbound security of material supply for what you make. It could be about the changes in regulation, and we've seen lots of this coming from FDA in recent times, when their scrutiny for categories which are on the ascendancy at the present moment has currently gone through the roof. So product formulation or product labeling, what that was acceptable just 8 or 12 weeks ago, is now back under the gun again. And we have to look forward to how those different regulatory changes might impact us in the future. But finally, also on a more practical level as well, is making sure that our teams back in our businesses are tracking that rapid change in consumer needs. If we believe that this is about testing a markets and whether we can supply them with products, we're missing the point. Our markets have changed. So therefore, we have to ask ourselves on a regular basis, why doesn't our product have to change? The answer may be no in the short term, but we have to be guiding and encouraging our businesses to be looking towards and modeling what those changes might be in the medium term. Fourth point here is very pragmatic. Which markets are irreplaceable? Plainly, every market is valuable to you, but no market should be irreplaceable. And we encourage you to go back to your original market selection criteria when you're struggling with markets and having to reinvest in them to make sure that it's still worthy of your attention. The shorthand that we're asking people here around the selection criteria is that you have to make a call whether to hold, fold, or play in any market that you're in. So going back to the basic criteria to understand and to remind yourself why you're in that market in the first place and what the opportunity is that you think you can get from there is critical to good decision making. Fifth point here is around competition. Without pointing out the obvious here, is that every sector and every market now has brand new entries. Because this has impacted everybody everywhere. Your competition has changed. There's like people are moving markets, and people are being increasingly agile in the channels they use and in the markets they access. So therefore, if you don't stop and look at who else is in your markets, you're going to miss those insights that you need to understand, first of all, who they are, but most importantly, what are you relative to them and the impact that has on your market positioning and even more fundamentally to your value proposition. The sixth question to take back here is about local demand creation. We've heard this time and time again here, is that we can't sit back and expect markets to kickstart themselves again. It's up to us to put investments in demand creation. And when I look at this from a competitive point of view, we have to remind ourselves here that when we're fighting for eyeballs, we're fighting for actions, we're fighting for a share of markets here, our competition is as hungry for sales and support from in-market partners as we are. We can't take those structures for granted anymore. And finally here, the final point, the final question, number 7, we have to challenge ourselves here whether our channel selection inside our markets is still able to reach our targets. Because as you'll know as well, it's been very well talked about here, is that channel migration has been the single biggest consumer response to COVID, predominantly from bricks and mortar into online. But what this means is that not only have your competitors changed, but the way that your consumers, if you're in the consumer markets, have changed as well. And what might have been absolutely perfect from your market partners' point of view or from your channel partners may now only be adequate. You may not be connecting right through to the people that you need to connect with as well. So these questions are designed to provoke and create conversation easily inside your business. The questions that help you to go back and to get your colleagues and to get your exec around you to be justifying and thinking about the changes that you have to make in your approach to the markets that you have. And in terms of getting ready and overcoming that barrier that we've seen, that inability to move forward because I don't have enough certainty, I don't have enough visibility, I have no precedence. If the only thing that you do this week is get around a table and collectively, anecdotally answer these 7 questions, then you'll be taking that first step to taking action more quickly, because at the present moment, time is the one thing that none of us actually have. So what I'd encourage you to do, just before I hand back to Christopher here, is to reach out and to embrace this new era of collaboration that you have with your export community. Our webinars are ongoing from around the world. The Export Recovery Panel is on at 10 o'clock every Friday, tomorrow included as well. And to reach out to partners like ourselves who are making products and tools like the Export Market Triage app freely available for you to use to help you get a better handle on what's going on inside your markets. But Chris, I'd like to hand back to you to collate some questions and some feedback, and let's get into some nitty gritty.
Actually, I've got a question first for both Andy and Chris. So, hey, businesses have had to cut costs, maybe restructure or relook at their business plan. Is there any funded support through the New Zealand government or local bodies that in New Zealand that they can tap into?
Chris, did you catch that?
I'm on mute. There we go. I'm on mute. Very good question, Maurice. Thank you. Look, there's quite a lot of substantial support out there from the government at the moment. If you're a current foundational focused customer for NZTE, there's a new program that we've just launched. By all means, get in touch with us. I can talk you through that, or get in touch with the customer manager. On the focus level, NZTE is just increasing that focus. It's just in the public announcement on Monday from 700 to 1,400 companies. At those levels, you get a lot more support from NZTE, and you also get a lot more support in market. But then there's also the International Growth Fund, which is applicable, which can do 60-40 contribution to market validation, market development funds in export markets. Then it depends on which sectors you're in, but if you're in primary growth, sustainability or e-commerce and so on, get in touch. There's all sorts of different funding options available at the moment. So I know there's a lot of challenge in businesses right now with COVID-19 and cash flow is hard, but from if we're looking at protecting revenue, we need to triage markets. On the other side, if the cash flow is tight, there is support out there from the government, from RPB, etc., to help support to do that. But the conversation today has to be around how do we protect that revenue and how do we find new opportunities in existing markets. More respect to you. If I can carry on. We actually have I just noticed someone on the panel as a mutual partner between Icehouse, Katabolt, and the BNZ, and that's Jason Reeves. I was just going to pass to Jason, actually, put him on the spot. Jason was the previous trade commissioner at NZTE in Japan, so he has a lot of wealth of the Japanese market and what's happening in those markets at the moment, but also is the exports director at BNZ. Jason, from what we've just been talking about, you're obviously in touch with a lot of businesses. What's your sense on the ground of what's happening in the market at the moment?
Thanks, Chris. I think it's somewhat varied depending on the industry. But I actually thought your slides are very thought-provoking. Going back to the earlier one you had on the screen there, Andy, when it was this kind of risk aversion, and I think we're having some conversations now with some customers that navigating your way through COVID, you're not going to grow through osmosis. So there needs to actually be a kind of coherent plan to come out the other side. And I think that's the real challenge when you mentioned, quite understandably, there is a bit risk aversion in the sense that with this unprecedented, we don't know what the future holds. Comparing what happened 12 months ago was not necessarily appropriate in the given environment. But I think we're now seeing just the seeds of some businesses that we're working with. I think what's the plan out of this? We need to make some constructive steps to come out the other side. So I think that's moving on from the initial kind of, to use your term of the program today, that kind of initial triage to cope what was in front of them. I think a number of now have got a little bit more perhaps headspace to actually think about not so much in the business, but on the business, what's the way to come out the other side. We've done the immediate kind of triage, and how do we position ourselves for growth? And I think that's I call that kind of phase two. And I think a number of businesses are just starting that kind of, phase two process. And that obviously that depends on the industries. I mean, for example, if I look at the tech industry, outside obviously media, which has its challenges, but the tech sector is actually doing very well the first 3 to 4 months of this year. Primarily to your point you made earlier, Andy, is that transition from kind of bricks and mortar to a digital operating environment. So they've done very well. And to date, New Zealand's kind of base kind of prime production, food and beverage, that to date's been largely, unimpacted. I saw some stats just, in fact, 2 days ago from Stats New Zealand, and it had merchandisable exports to the first kind of from February through to May, I think were down only 0.5%, which is almost kind of margin of error stuff at this stage. And that's largely to do with a kind of record harvest and pricing for kiwi fruit. But we'll see how that kind of pans out for the remainder of the year. And I think the impact will be, as you mentioned on the earlier slide, Andy, I think Minister Parker mentioned that the WTO estimates merchandisable trade to drop something in the region of 13 to 17% massively over the year. How's that going to impact New Zealand, given the fact that we have largely, in terms of our F&B base, I call it a largely demand insensitive, in the sense that, what we produce, consumption patterns don't change dramatically irrespective, or historically, irrespective of major crisis, be it the GFC, be it SARS, be it MARS. And you could argue in some aspects, actually, some of our particular products, those in the kind of nutraceutical phase, the health and wellness, actually can get a bit of a bump through these times. Perhaps that's a story associated also with the kiwi fruit for the first 2 months of this year. So I think that's for the businesses. It's the challenge of moving out of immediate kind of dealing with what's in front of you to actually positioning. How do we go forward, and what does that mean? And to your point, the slide you showed there, is it refining our products? Is it the right channels to market? We have a bricks and mortar, but we also have an online presence. Do we have to ramp up our online presence? Do we have the right distributors in place? Do we need to refine our product offering? So I think these are the questions now that I think businesses have a little more time, perhaps, to think about, considering, because they've worked through the immediate consequences of COVID, and now it's kind of how do we kind of position ourselves? We've seen the market dynamics change. What does that mean for our business, and then how do we adopt accordingly?
So, Jason, look, thank you very much for that, and I'm going to pick up on a couple of themes there. One is around the point Andy was talking about before around triaging. It was fascinating. We're having a conversation with Craig Armstrong, one of the directors at NZTE, and Craig put us on the spot and said, how quickly does this triage product work? And we said, well, it's COVID-19. It'll take 1 week.
Yes.
And the driver there is this stuff has to happen at speed and pace at the moment. And another point I want to just pick on there with regards to food and beverage, and a fascinating statistic out of the Corliss report from about 3 or 4 years ago, was that if New Zealand exports all of its food it produces out of this country, we can only feed 70 million people.
Yeah.
There is a phenomenal opportunity out there, right? And it's about how do we create that value or find those value consumers and customers out there to get more money back to this country. Christine, I'm gonna pick on you because you're in Melbourne. Keen to understand what business you are and what are you sensing over in Melbourne at the moment?
Hi, Christopher. So I guess I wear three hats. I have my own retail and customer experience consultancy, so I work with clients here in Australia. I am a beachhead advisor with NZTE, focused around retail and customer experience, and I'm also on an advisory board for a small New Zealand business. So my purpose for joining today was really to hear the conversation. It's super important for me to be very connected to a key market for me and to support my customers. And I'm not here in any way representing NZTE, but I'm certainly deeply invested, as are all of the beachhead advisors, and the success of people who are really wanting to foster and grow their businesses here in Australia. So in terms of what I'm seeing, I think Australia continues to be really complicated. I'm sure for any of you who are tracking this Trans-Tasman bubble, and being a Kiwi, I'm desperate to get home and see my family. But we've got this federal challenge. So whilst there's a national strategy around response to COVID-19, there's a very much a state variation that's adding a lot of complexity in terms of people being able to do different things at different times with different size customer groups and so forth between, say, even Sydney and Melbourne. But that complexity has always been here for Australia. We know we're super close, but it is a different way of doing business here. And I think despite the fact that we didn't go into the full lockdown, as you did in New Zealand, it has been striking the difference across the different categories between, I guess, what you would say is essential and non-essential. But I think everyone's pretty optimistic, despite the fact that it's going to be a tough economic road, I think, for the next 6 to 12 months.
Fascinating. Team, I'm just going to thank you very much for that. I'm just going to open it up to everyone. Any Q&A or questions there for us, and by all means, you don't need to disclose what business you're in or your business name, but please throw it open to the wider group.
I've actually got a question for both you, Chris, and it's around industries. You know, are you finding certain industries are actually thriving versus other industries that are actually struggling?
Andy, I'll pass to you in a second. I'm just going to talk around what through COVID-19. So if we go back to lockdown 4, food and beverage in the medium to large size businesses did exceptionally well because they had the channels into the supermarkets and there was a phenomenal amount of volume created out of there. That really impacted the small businesses. And there's a little bit of a risk there for the bigger businesses at the moment because they've been focused on their current production, supply in New Zealand, and the theory is, and this comes from conversations out of NZTE, a lot of them have been distracted and not focused on their export channels. So hence the reason some of this triage conversations happening right now of how do we triage those markets internationally to find out what's working and what's not. In the manufacturing sector, it's fascinating. 3 or 4 of our clients in manufacturing in the B2B space are doing exceptionally well. In the tech sector, they're doing exceptionally well because a lot of them are already playing in the e-commerce or their online space. I think the overarching theme that I've picked up with all the conversations I've been having is if you're taking a strategic approach to the challenges we have at the moment, and you're listening to the opportunities and you're working with your advisors and your boards and iterating and reacting, you can come out of this and see the opportunities and work fast. It's the companies that have their head in the sand a little bit that I feel a little bit concerned for because it's, you know, we've got a classic example in Hawke's Bay here, a technology company, and he decided that he'd have his board meetings weekly. Now he's actually doubled in size in 12 weeks. Because he had the advisory there, he had the insights, he had the focus, he had constant iteration going on. Andy,
also
from running the webinar series over the last 12 weeks, what do you think?
I'm just saying, it's like anybody who knows me knows that I'm always likely to look on the dark side, and this isn't an exception. And Jason knows that as well. It's like for a lot of organisations that we've talked to, if they've been able to trade through this and to be able to ride the demands, it's actually been a very, very hard line for them to be able to manage. Plainly, there's been issues with managing inventory and being able to get enough ingredients or enough active ingredients into your plants in the right place at the right time. So there's been inbound supply shock that has been made manufacturing difficult. And also you might have a product that's going off like a robber's dog on a platform like Amazon in the US, but actually getting product from the wharf into their DC has been completely broken. So what happens there is that it's like demand is there and you sell through, but because there's a backlog getting into their DC, then the algorithms end up killing your ranks because you go out of stock, and it's not your fault you're out of stock. So sometimes the automation of those platforms turns everything upside down. That suck through of demands is fantastic. So you get that spike in sales, but the various breakpoints in supply chain means that you can end up with a situation that's slightly worse than where you started off as well. So it's like there's been lots of conversations about just the sheer challenges of riding that wave, and also knowing when that wave's going to stop as well. Because if you're riding that wave and all your focus is in being able to manage that demand and get enough products into markets in the right place at the right time, then once that drops off, then you're caught napping again, because you haven't had the time and the mind space to be able to do the planning. We had a number of people on from the UK over the last few weeks, where they've been pointing out the massive difference and benefit that we've had in New Zealand compared to the UK's furlough scheme. So our wage subsidy has enabled everybody to remain productive inside a business. So it's like the government's intervened and done the right thing and put some cash back in to make sure that you can hold on to key talents. Whereas in the UK, it's like the furlough scheme means that you take that talent out of the workforce. The government's paid to remove people. So all that capability you've had in downtime to be able to look ahead, to plan, to structure has been taken away. So we've actually been way more fortunate, even just in the way that government intervention has come in play.
So we've only got time for one more question, and sorry, I'm going to hog that. So I recently came back from Tauranga, and obviously Tauranga is a big export community, and they're finding, just outside of the normal business stresses, following on from your point there, Andy, that they are ever increasing in stress around shipping and then getting that product to whoever it is over in across the world. Are there any hints or tips, or have you seen any themes or anything to kind of reassure these business owners and senior leaders that, hey, it will be okay eventually? Or are there any any bits of advice to get them to stop them from maybe stressing more than what they kind of should be?
Simple. Triage your markets and do it fast and now. It doesn't take, it's not costly, it's not expensive, it's not time consuming. You've got to understand what's happening in dynamics. I was just about to talk about New Zealand Post and their great contribution and what we've been doing. There's a lot of partners out there, but there's no new normal. There's only the new, right? And this new is going to be constant. So if you want to alleviate the stress, you've got to just be understanding and speaking to your partners in the market, triaging your market, and understanding what's going on. Andy, anything to add to that?
Well, just this thing, there's no, because every market in every place in the world has been impacted by this. Everybody's recovering at their own pace. So there's no set of blanket rules that you can apply to your full set of markets. So if, for example, you're exporting to 3 or 4 or 5 markets, then the way that they're all responding is there's no correlation to each other, because it's all relative to how that country is doing. So the only way, it's like what we've done in trying to design product with NZTE to be able to use to triage quickly, is to get enough information, get the maximum amount of information you can in one place at one time, so you can make an informed decision. What's the stalling has been because it hasn't been the right time to move, or because I don't have enough information. So the idea here is to get as much information as you can in the right place in the right time, so you can make an informed decision about what we're going to do right now. Because if we keep waiting for all the data points, our market's going to be full of new competitors. Our consumers are going to be working in new channels, and it doesn't matter, with the best one in the world, we're going to be playing catch up. And like, as the government's pointed out, there is new value to be found. In the new is not just about a bad version of the old. It's actually, it's terrific. There's new expectation, these new opportunities, and we have to keep looking for that new. But business as usual involves managing and taking that almost startup mindset with you and putting that back in the center of your business around exports. It's actually going back to basics and understanding why you're there and how you're trading, and whether everything's in place is actually fit for purpose for what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Sorry, Chris?
I was just going to say, one of our clients only on Monday gave me a call and said there was talking to their distributor in a market, and their number one competitor out of Germany has been pulled off the shelves. They can't supply. So then they're collaborating together around, okay, how do we position your product in that space? How do we bring in another white label product? So all of a sudden the production out of New Zealand is just going through the roof because they're collaborating and working with their partner, right? This is happening week to week. And if you can own that space and then work with the supermarket in this case, you know, this phenomenal opportunity, but you need to be in communication with your partners and triaging your markets.
And I mean, there's also opportunity, again, you know, New Zealanders connecting with New Zealanders. There's so many manufacturing businesses that have decided, oh, actually, I can't get a certain product from a certain country anymore. Why don't we just make it ourselves? Yes, it may cost more initially, but in the long run, or collaborate with another business that might be doing something similar that can potentially adapt to whatever it is that you want. Yeah.
You've opened a very, very interesting topic, and one which we're going to be delving into tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Was that a plug? It was a plug. Thank you very much. So I'm here. I should have a t-shirt on. It's like, because it's about what we're talking about here is the conversation tomorrow is about protectionism. Everybody in the world, every exporter has been hit by the protectionist measures which markets have taken within the first 40 days of COVID hitting. And when we think about taking, like, for example, bringing manufacturing back and doing more here, are we actually creating a better future for the country, or are we following the protectionist mantra of other nations? So again, there's going to be a good conversation tomorrow in and around that particular topic. It's a deep one, and I'm really glad you pointed it out. It's going to be interesting discussion.